Glenn, you're not missing anything. I mean, the tie-in to the Islamic State is pretty clear when you have an individual who's saying he's doing this in the name of that entity. And so I think that the debate that's happening right now as to whether he received a specific exhortation to do this or he just decided to act on previous instructions isn't really particularly meaningful.
Right.
It doesn't matter at all. This is exactly what the Islamic State wants. And we can see that the Australians, while they have gotten aggressive, there were hundreds of police officers involved in raids back in September. It's not enough. They're not going to catch everyone. We saw a few casualties from this attack. It could have been a lot more casualties, Glenn, quite honestly. And I think that the Australians have recognized that this problem is going to continue on. And we're not even counting possible returnees from the main fronts in Iraq and Syria. These are people that are already in Australia.
Okay, so we didn't talk about his criminal record. The guy's not a nobody. What do you have to do to be deported in Australia? Explain his criminal record.
I want to know what you have to do to be put in prison for a long time in Australia, because he is charged with dozens of different sexual crimes, various assaults, and also on top of that is a suspect allegedly stabbed or was involved in a stabbing death of his ex-wife and lit her on fire and left her body in the stairwell of an apartment building. So he was a very bad guy with all sorts of outstanding, incredibly serious criminal charges before he decided to seize a number of hostages and execute some of them when the assault actually happened today. So I think that's actually where the Australian government is vulnerable to some real criticism. How is this guy still walking around on the streets? By the way, Glenn, you can still rifle through his Twitter account, which makes it quite clear that he thinks people should join the Islamic State. He hates Australia and he wants to wage jihad. So he was literally advertising this.
Tell me the difference between that guy and an Islamic jihad guy. I mean, somebody who's with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. It doesn't matter. He is following their instructions. He's doing what they ask. He's doing their bidding. What's the difference?
There is no. It's just a command and control discussion that doesn't really mean anything, Glenn, except for the possibility of follow-on attack. So if he did receive, for example, a direct order from the Islamic State. And by the way, in those September raids in Australia, there was a direct connection. There was an Islamic State member who was Australian who was saying, get involved in this strike. They wanted to behead a random civilian in Australia, and that was one of the plots that was disrupted. But the only reason you want to know this, Glenn, is in case there are others who may have received similar instructions. So for investigative purposes, it could be necessary. But for ideological purposes, no. All we need to know is that this was in solidarity with the Islamic State, and there are more of these lone wolves or self-radicalized individuals out there.
So is there a reason, Buck, at all that we excuse our politicians, not just in Australia, but here too, that we excuse our politicians? As I read the statement, from the Prime Minister, and he said, well, it's just a lone wolf, and we don't want to give them everything that they want. That is exactly what they wanted. In their order, they said, rise up, make sure you give credit to ISIS, blah, 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 blah. Is there a reason why we can all just say, okay, they don't want to give ISIS more power? Or is that just bullcrap?
No, Glenn, I think that the acting on the instructions here is very much the game plan from the Islamic State's point of view. And I think the Australian government is always taking this position of, well, this happened this one time and we need to have these stricter security policies, but let's not jump to any conclusions. And when you have a guy who's saying, please get me an Islamic State flag so I can really put their signature on this thing, you're not jumping to a conclusion, you're just making one. And the Australian government seems to be falling into the same trap that we have here. Remember, after Fort Hood, we had a general, a four-star, saying that he hoped diversity wasn't a casualty. And this was after we had a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. You have Australians already speaking out about how they're so concerned about a backlash. The backlash never happens here. No one's worried about an individual, or rather about a society deciding to pick on one individual for this. We're worried about a society that's under assault from extremist elements that are working in a systemic fashion over time to try to undermine the very freedoms the Australians enjoy, and the same thing with us here at home. That's the real concern, not the possibility of there being some sort of an overreach if we just call it what it is. We all know what it is.
So we're going to be launching a show with Buck here soon. And I went up to New York last week and I started talking to him about showing that basically I would want his show to pretty much center around that chalkboard. Radical Islamists, communist socialists work together against Israel, together against capitalism, together to overturn stability. The protests become contagious, they cascade, sweep the Middle East, begin to destabilize Europe and the rest of the world. and show you those connections, because it's not just happening here in the United States. It's not just it's happening all over the world. And anybody who thinks that it's a lone wolf, what's the difference? Was Al Sharpton? I was at a mall, Buck, this weekend, and I went Christmas shopping, and I'm at a Belk's store. Al Sharpton did not call for this no justice, no peace. I'm sure Al Sharpton wasn't there. But a group of local people got into the mall, and they carried the signs, and they were doing no justice, no peace. It's the same story, is it not? Is that a lone wolf, or is that connected?
Well, and the broader ideology, Glenn, does have an impact. And revolutionary ideology, which we should be clear, global jihad is a revolutionary ideology. It's based upon individuals and groups around the world acting to overturn existing societies to create a totalitarian Islamic theocracy around the world. So it's very much a revolutionary ideology. And the whole purpose of it is to be spread. It's to be spread through fear, through violence, and through intimidation. And we see various iterations of revolutionary ideology here at home as well. I walked into a protest also trying to just buy Christmas presents for my family, and I couldn't believe the things that are being said. They're talking about racist, murdering cops walking around in the streets. No surprise here, Glenn. We've already had now a number of serious assaults against police officers in the city from these protesters. They're planning to do another big one tomorrow night. Now, we can either believe that this is all just them venting, letting off some steam, and they don't actually, none of them, even the hardcore elements among them, don't believe this is going to mean anything. Or you can think that they're actually trying to push for some kind of a real inciting event and a transformation of society. I think the hardliners would say it's the latter in a moment of honesty, and I've heard them say that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some pretty outrageous stuff from them in the weeks ahead.
Buck, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. This should just go as an idea to you, a message to all of you who are watching, that I am still very, very serious about what's happening in the world. Some people think that, Glenn, because he's going to do, the American Dream Labs, he doesn't care about what's happening in the world. I've been saying this for over almost 2 years now to Buck, and we're just going to put it on the air in January, hopefully January or February when we can get it all finished. But I'm putting what I believe will be the next Nightline on the air. Nightline in 1979 went on the air because of Islamic extremists, and it was all about the Iranian hostage crisis, and they covered that every single night, 6 ways to Sunday. There's a revolution going on in the world, and it's communists, radicals, socialists, Islamists, anarchists that want revolution, and they're planting it all around the world. And we're going to put together quite an amazing team all around the world, and Buck is going to show you those connections every night. More on that as we get